going on, everybody? This is Bobby G, aka Bobby Bookworm, back again for another edition of Saturday Shpiel. And this one is a loaded one. It's a double portion this week, which means 2 portions in 1 week. Also, it's Rosh Chodesh Av. For those who don't know, Rosh Chodesh is a new moon, a new month on the Jewish calendar. Sometimes, as in the case of today, it falls on a Shabbat or a Sabbath. So there are 2 readings for that. For those who want the Rosh Chodesh readings for Av, which is also kind of a mournful month, especially the 9th of Av, which is coming up here pretty soon. The readings for Rosh Chodesh Av and for all Rosh Chodesh are Numbers chapter 28 verses 1 through 15 and 1 Peter chapter 2 verses 4 through 10. Now that's for Rosh Chodesh. As far as today's double reading, we have Matot and we have Maseh. And this is basically with regard to the journeys of the tribes. You have Numbers chapter 30 verse 2 to chapter 36 verse 13, which finishes out the book of Numbers, also known as Babi the Bar. Isaiah chapter 66 verses 1 through 24. Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 1 to chapter 2 verse 28. Mark chapter 11 verses 12 through 23. Luke chapter 13 verses 1 through 9. Acts chapter 9 verses 1 through 22. And James chapter 4 verses 1 through 12. And that's a lot. Let's say that's a lot. Now, what have I gained from reading all of these passages? What did I gain this past week while I was reading them? Well, a couple things. One, disobedience is going to get you nowhere fast. Like, disobedience to God's will in your life is going to get you nowhere fast. Trust me how I know. Not only that, but walking in humility is what is best, because I mean it's referred to in the book of James how he disregards the proud but gives grace to the humble. And you know, we see that in all of these passages throughout, because you look at Jeremiah, which Jeremiah and Isaiah actually go together, because the chapter in Isaiah that I have for this week also goes into that, and it's the end of those books and goes into another. Now, Israel and Judah were not being humble before God, and because they were choosing to not be humble before God, they were opposed by God, because they chose not to be humble. And James talks about, to believers, in particular Messianic believers, to give some context, you know, where do suits come within you? You know, you don't have because you don't ask, and then you ask and you don't get what you want, because the reason you're asking is not for humble reasons. The reason you're asking is so you can just while out, essentially, because he says you ask and do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend it on your pleasures. In other words, sometimes people don't get what they want from God because they're not asking for what's right before God. They're just asking for God for stuff so I can, you know, that'd be like me asking for God to ask for stuff so I can do me, so I can while out, instead of asking provision from God to provide so that I can do His will in my life. You know, so we have to be mindful of what we ask for and why, right? And I mean, you have things in Numbers such as, you know, with regards to vows, vengeance on Midian, because Midian tricked them, the eastern tribes on the other side of the Jordan, Israel's journeys, the borders, and the Levitical cities. Now, I think the question we have to ask ourselves, and I have to ask myself from time to time, is who do you serve? Who do you serve? Because if you serve your own desires, it's going to get you nowhere. But if you serve God in humility, then things will go well with you. I would say that, you know, in the case of Luke, we see Jesus talking about that there's nobody worse than others with regards to what happened with Pilate, and then also what happened to the 18 in the Tower of Siloam. And in Acts, we find what's going on with the Holy Spirit and with regards to the church in Acts chapter 9. Because what we end up seeing here is Saul's conversion. Because Saul, this is the thing about God give grace to the humble, and that nobody is worse than anybody else in this world. Again, we look back to Jesus' passages and we see that, and we see an example of that in Saul, where he gets knocked off his horse, literally, because he was going from Jerusalem to Damascus to, arrest the disciples of Jesus, or Yeshua, as we know him, and anyone who followed him. And he gets knocked off his horse, and probably not long after he's baptized, he starts preaching the word, and everybody's kind of like, wait a minute, in this so-and-so who came from Jerusalem to come here and arrest some of the disciples of the way? And even Ananias, who was a follower of the Lord, was like, Lord, I've heard about this guy. I know what he's about. And you want me to do what? You want me to pray for him and anoint him and, make it so he can see again? But that's what God asks of him, because God says to Ananias that he's a chosen vessel for me. Where am I going with all this? Well, there is nobody that God cannot save. The question is, are you or anybody else who's watching this video, are you humble enough to ask God for forgiveness so that you may be lifted up? Because again, as it is written, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. And again, James refers to that, as do a few others. And, we have a choice. Each of us, you and me, to ask ourselves a question: are we going to be loyal to God? Are we going to know our role and stay in our lane and be right before God? Or are we just going to while out? And I think if anybody really has a question to ask us in this country, a lot of people have to in this land, but in particular people in the church, we as believers, we who are followers, whether you're Messianic, Baptist, or whatever, we all have to ask ourselves a question, are we doing right before God? Are we serving God, or are we trying to serve ourselves? These are the questions that we need to ask from days such as these, in the times that we live in. So my hope is that as you go forward this week and as you study these words, especially it's a new month, because a new month means new start, I hope that you ask yourself the question of, who am I serving? That's the question I want to leave you with. My name's Bobby G, aka Bobby Bookworm. This has been Saturday Shpiel. Lord willing, hope they'll see y'all next week. Peace.